Teresa Skubic, and this is Forum Daily for Wednesday, February 11th. We begin tonight with devastating news coming out of British Columbia. RCMP say 9 people are dead and 27 others were injured following a mass shooting on Tuesday afternoon in Tumbler Ridge, located in the northeast part of the province. 7 of the victims were found at Tumbler Ridge Secondary School. All remaining staff and students were safely evacuated from the school. 2 others were found dead inside of the home, and police believe it is connected to the crime. Deputy Commissioner Dwayne McDonald shared that the suspect has been identified as Jesse Van Rootselaar, an 18-year-old from Tumbler Ridge.
On February 10th at approximately 1:20 p.m. Pacific Standard Time at Tumbler Ridge, RCMP received a report of an active shooter at Tumbler Ridge Secondary School. A police-initiated public alert, PIPA, was issued as officers responded. Police from Tumbler Ridge RCMP and surrounding detachments responded immediately, with members from the local detachment arriving within 2 minutes of the initial call. Upon arrival, there was active gunfire, and as officers approached the school, rounds were fired in their direction. Officers entered the school to locate the threat. Within minutes, an individual confirmed to be the shooter was located deceased, with what appeared to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The suspect has been identified as 18-year-old Jesse Van Rootselaar, who is a resident of Tumbler Ridge. I'd like to correct some information that was shared yesterday and to clarify that 9 people in total are deceased as a result of this incident. Initially, it was believed that one of the victims, a female with significant injuries, who was transported from the scene by our members and then transitioned to paramedics, had succumbed to her injuries. Police have since confirmed that is not the case. She is alive and was one of the 2 female victims that were airlifted to hospital. Both of those victims remain in serious condition. The deceased victims from the school include an adult female educator, 3 female students, and 2 male students between the ages of 13 and 17. We do believe the suspect acted alone, and there are currently no other outstanding suspects. Our investigators remain on scene, actively gathering information to determine the full circumstances of what transpired. This is a deeply distressing incident where 9 individuals have senselessly lost their lives. Our thoughts are with the families, the loved ones, the first responders in the greater Tumbler Ridge community, and all those impacted by this tragic incident.
Speaking at a press conference after the shooting, BC Premier David Eby gave some brief remarks regarding the incident and urged British Columbians and all Canadians to, quote, wrap the people of Tumbler Ridge with love.
I'd like to take this opportunity to ask British Columbians, to ask all Canadians to wrap the people of Tumbler Ridge, wrap these families with love. Not just tonight, but tomorrow and into the future. This is something that will reverberate for years to come. As British Columbians, I know that one of the things we do best is look after each other, and I'm asking British Columbians to look after the people of Tumbler Ridge tonight. For our government's role, we'll make sure that the resources are there for the community. They're already being deployed on the site, and I'd like to ask the Public Safety Minister to provide you an update on what's happening in the community to provide support right now.
An emergency alert went out Tuesday afternoon describing the suspect as a female in a dress with brown hair. Tumbler Ridge, with a population of about 2,400, is located in BC's Peace region. The school district says due to the tragedy, the high school and elementary school will both be closed for the remainder of the week. This is being seen as one of the largest mass shooting events in Canadian history. Prime Minister Mark Carney has cancelled planned trips to Halifax and Munich, Germany, following Tuesday's deadly shooting. In a statement, Carney said he is devastated by what he called the horrific shooting in Tumbler Ridge, BC, adding that he joins Canadians in grieving with those whose lives have been changed forever. Carney had been set to travel to Halifax today to unveil the long-awaited defense industrial strategy before heading to Munich for the rest of the week to attend the Munich Security Conference. Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke with reporters in Ottawa this morning about the heartbreaking news coming out of British Columbia.
Well, it's obviously a very difficult day for the nation. This morning, parents, grandparents, sisters, brothers in Tumbler Ridge will wake up without someone they love. The nation mourns with you. Canada stands by you. I want to thank and pass on a number of world leaders who've reached out directly to me in solidarity and compassion. France, United Kingdom, His Majesty himself, Norway, Finland, India, United Arab Emirates, many others. The world is with you. I have spoken to Premier Eby. Minister of Public Safety has been engaged, as have many Canadian officials over the evening. Minister of Public Safety is en route to British Columbia. He and the Premier will be visiting the community. All assistance, obviously, will be offered. We thank the first responders, the teachers, the staff, the residents, for everything that they've done in this terrible situation. On the advice of the Clerk of the Privy Council and Heritage Canada, I've asked that the flags in the Peace Tower here and across all government buildings be flown at half-mast for the next 7 days. We will get through this, we will learn from this, but right now it's a time to come together, as Canadians always do in these situations, these terrible situations, to support each other, to mourn together, and to grow together.
And while speaking this afternoon in the House of Commons, the Prime Minister again addressed the deadly shooting.
This morning, families in Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia, woke to a different world. Parents, grandparents, brothers, sisters began this day as their first day on earth without someone they loved dearly. What happened has left our nation in shock and all of us in mourning. It's a town of miners, teachers, construction workers, families who have built their lives there, people who have always shown up for each other there. When wildfires raged, neighbors helped each other pack up and move out of harm's way. They checked in on seniors and those living alone. They made sure that no one was left behind. When the coal mine shut down, residents supported local businesses. They shared leads for jobs, and they lifted each other up. Mr. Speaker, Tumbler Ridge represents the very best of Canada, resilient, compassionate, and strong.
And Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre held a news conference in Ottawa this morning offering his condolences to everyone in Tumbler Ridge and called on Canadians to unite and support the community.
Thank you very much, everyone. Obviously, we are all devastated by the news of this appalling shooting in Tumbler Ridge. The fact that this took place at a secondary school, it makes it even more tragic. As a father, I can't even imagine the phone calls that parents might have received. I can't imagine the heartache and hell that they're living through at this moment. This is a time for all Canadians to unite, to support the families and the community at large. We'll be in touch with the Prime Minister and the other parties later today to offer all of our support to work together and help the community in any way we can in this terrible time. I encourage all Canadians to pray for the community and pray for the family as we go forward and take the necessary steps to support them. Thank you very much.
Poilievre again expressed his condolences while speaking in the House of Commons.
As fathers, we both know the feeling of sending our kids to school, hoping that they'll play and perform, laugh and learn, but most of all, come home to us in our loving arms at night. Sure, there's the odd skinned knee or sore belly when they get back, but that's usually the worst of our concerns. Yesterday, as we were tucking our kids in, I got a terrible phone call from Bob Zimmer, the Member of Parliament, who represents Tumbler Ridge. Behind every number is a name, a child, a friend, a teacher, a neighbor, a family member, each with a story. For as the rabbi said, each life is its own universe. As a father, I can only imagine the phone call or visit that brought the news, the panic, the helplessness, the heartache that followed. No parent should ever have to fear that their child will not return home from school. No parent should ever bury their own child.
Reports are suggesting that Ottawa has started to make payments for key components for 14 additional U.S.-built F-35s, even as the Carney government has been reviewing future fighter jet purchases in the context of trade tensions with Washington. The money for these 14 aircraft is in addition to the contract for a first order of 16 F-35s, which will start being delivered to the Canadian Armed Forces at the end of the year. According to sources, the new expenses are related to the purchase of so-called long lead items, which are parts that must be ordered well in advance of the delivery of a fully assembled aircraft. Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet responded to the report.
I think this is not consistent with what we have heard before. We have heard the Davos speech of Mr. Carney saying that United States were no more a reliable partner in terms of defense and in terms of trade. And now we see the same Prime Minister letting ministers confirm what seems to be the buying of some 14 more F-35 planes, which means that there's no study of the contract, there's no suspension of the contract, and when United States call and say, you give us your money and you buy the planes, Canada, as always, says, yes, sir.
Air Canada on Monday suspended service to Cuba because of a shortage of aviation fuel on the island, as the Caribbean nation faces a worsening energy crisis amid a U.S. blockade of oil. The airline said it made the decision following advisories issued by governments regarding the unreliability of the aviation fuel supply at Caribbean airports, adding that it would dispatch empty flights southbound to pick up about 3,000 travelers to bring them home. I sat down with aviation expert John Graddick to break down how unusual it is for major carriers like Air Canada and WestJet to suspend service over fuel supply issues.
Rare, very rare. And, I hate being a conspiracy theorist on it, but, this sounds, kind of a little murky. So Cuba on Sunday made the announcement that your fuel will be out of commission as of Tuesday morning. So no fuel available to pick up. And so Monday, the U.S. government, U.S. FAA issues NOTAMs, notice to airmen, talking about, the implications. And they specifically issued a NOTAM for Canadian operators flying out of Cuba that would be overflying U.S. airspace, saying that those carriers would be prohibited from landing in the U.S. for fuel. Only those airplanes operated by Canadian carriers operating out of Cuba. And no other island, of course. But they basically said, doesn't matter, you declare an emergency over U.S. airspace, you can't land here. So you're on your own, which is, to me, a violation of international air law. And you start doing that, and basically airplanes declare emergencies. And, you land when you land. So medical emergencies, aircraft emergencies, all kinds of stuff, you land. And there's no provision. So this time, the NOTAM was very specific. And then within hours of that NOTAM comes out, Air Canada cancels and said the only thing we're going to fly to Cuba is repatriation flights. WestJet and Air Transat, WestJet, Sunwing said we're going to continue. That lasted for about 4 or 5 hours. And then Monday night, WestJet cancels. And then later Monday evening, Transat cancels. But by Monday night, they all cancel. So the other thing that's important to note in this one, all the other carriers operating into and out of Cuba internationally are still operating. So American, Delta, United, Iberia, Varig, they all operate. Air France is operating. And so they're operating that we're going to stop for fuel along the way. And which is normal, if you have a problem like this. So this is highly unusual for a suspension of services until April 30th, at the earliest, and for all operations out of Cuba. So this seems to be a little bit of a conspiracy theory that what, the Americans basically pulled a plug on Canada and said, we're going to make it very difficult for you to serve Cuba. And that's what they've done.
John also unpacked how complicated and costly it is to dispatch empty aircraft to bring stranded passengers home.
It's expensive. I think this is it. It's going to be the millions of dollars aggregate for all three carriers. And $15,000 an hour to fly an airplane. So, you got to fly an airplane down to Cuba, turn around, come back. So that's a 7.5, 8 hour cycle. So each one of those airplanes is going to cost Air Canada out of pocket. Each flight, $300,000. They've got 16 flights that they got to cover. WestJet's got same number, Transat same number. So this is all going to cost the industry over $1 million. Now, if they didn't do it, they basically said, you're on your own. This is outside of our control. Find your own way home. Then a different story. Then the Canadian government would have stepped in, ordered repatriation flights, or would have done it on themselves using, armed forces aircraft. But, I think that the airlines basically knew the government was watching this very, very closely, and they took action before they were forced to take action to repatriate.
We also discussed if airlines are typically responsible for compensation when the disruption is tied to fuel shortages or government advisories.
No, they're not. In the air passenger protection rights, there is a clause in there that basically says that there are situations that are out of the airline's control, that there is no compensation being due. There's due care for passengers. Airlines have to look at, trying to find alternative routings to get passengers home. But in this case, there aren't any. And so you're on your own. So if it wasn't for the repatriation flights, my concern is that people who left on Saturday or Sunday or 2 weeks in Cuba on Air Canada or WestJet or Air Transat, your vacation is shot because you're going to have to come home. The repatriation flights won't be every day. They'll only last for another couple of days, and that's it. So you're going to have to, if you want to leave Cuba, you're going to have to cut short your vacation by a week or two and get back on those repatriation flights. Come back home.
The last time Cuba saw fuel rationing this strict was more than a decade ago. John discussed how significant it is from an aviation standpoint.
It is significant. I think the last time we did this, there was no cancellation of flights. There was no interruption. The carriers did, in fact, do their thing and basically stop the intermediate locations for fuel. So, this was, I said on Monday that I thought Air Canada overreacted, on the side of being extremely cautious when they decided to cancel their flights until May 1st. Overreaction, that's what I thought. But then when I saw WestJet and Transat, and so, I thought that these guys would hang in there longer than Air Canada would. Astoundingly, all three canceled. So to me, there was something happening behind the scenes that basically caused the Canadian carriers to give up servicing Cuba for a couple of months.
Assembly of First Nations National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepinak is pushing back against Alberta's separatist movement, calling it both illegitimate and unconstitutional. Speaking at a conference, she said any talk of separation ignores the rights and sovereignty of First Nations and made it clear that they would not consent to such a move.
At this time, more than any other time, we should be bonding together and talking about how we are going to unite as a nation versus separation as a province. That is why we are all here today, to unite, to build together, to beat Trump and not join him. The truth is that Alberta government has no right to supersede or interfere with First Nations treaties, even indirectly by passing the buck to a citizen referendum. Any proposal to separate Alberta from Canada is fundamentally illegitimate and unconstitutional without the explicit, prior, informed, and collective consent of First Nations whose lands and rights predate the formation of this province or of any other province and that of Canada. We need to call it what it is, because Albertans need to know that if you vote to separate from Canada, you can't take the land with you. If people aren't happy in this beautiful country that we're building together, then they're free to go and live wherever they want. They can take the dirt that may be there. I told them this a few months ago, and I'm going to tell them again, that they can take the dirt that maybe their ancestors brought with them under their fingernails when they came over here from other places, because that's the only piece of land that they're going to take. The time has come for Alberta and Canada to move beyond colonial frameworks and honor the truth of their history by restoring justice and self-determination to First Nations.
Alberta government officials say they are hitting pause on a recent policy change that cut off health coverage for some temporary foreign workers. A spokesperson with the Ministry of Primary and Preventative Health says the original change was a premature decision made within the department. Banff, Lake Louise, and other communities in the Bow Valley region rely on seasonal and temporary foreign workers to help sustain their tourism-based economies. The Bow Valley Immigration Partnership says it welcomes the decision to pause the changes, but is looking to clarify when a government review may conclude. A new report from rentals.ca says asking rents for apartments in Vancouver have dropped 9.2% year over year. That's the largest decrease among Canada's 6 largest markets. It says asking prices now for a one-bedroom apartment in Vancouver fell by 6.3% compared with this same period last year. The average of $2,630 in rent for an apartment in Vancouver was at its lowest since February of 2022. Outside the big markets, 5 cities in BC were among the 15 cities showing the largest decreases in apartment asking rents. Despite the fact that he did not receive the death penalty in China, Canadian Robert Schillenberg is not out of danger. That's according to fellow Canadian Michael Kovrig, who was detained for more than 1,000 days himself in the Asian nation. Kovrig says that the Canadian government needs to advocate for the release of Schillenberg. Chinese officials say Schillenberg will face a retrial on drug charges. Kovrig says nobody deserves that level of suffering that one experiences over long periods of time in a Chinese prison, which is why he is advocating for Schillenberg's release. Todd Lyons, the acting head of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, was on Capitol Hill Tuesday, defending his officers and their tactics. Lyons said the agency won't be intimidated as it carries out President Donald Trump's mass deportation agenda. He was one of 3 agency leaders called to testify following the shooting deaths of 2 Americans involving federal officers. The hearing was tense at times, with sharp criticism from Democrats and strong backing from most Republicans, as lawmakers debated how immigration enforcement is being carried out in U.S. cities.
We have seen state and local jurisdictions refuse to protect federal law enforcement officers. And obviously, we have now seen the deaths of 2 American citizens in Minnesota. This is all unacceptable and preventable. The safety of law enforcement and the communities they serve and protect must always come first. When officials or elected leaders rush to conclusions about law enforcement or their fellow Americans, public trust suffers.
The President tasked us with mass deportation, and we are fulfilling that mandate. Thanks to the resources provided by this Congress, we are ramping up detention capabilities and removal flights daily. In the last year alone, we conducted over 475,000 removals.
These attacks on federal law enforcement personnel are coordinated and well-funded. This is not peaceful protest. No law enforcement officer should be put at personal risk simply for doing the job that we have asked them to do.
People are simply making valid observations about your tactics, which are un-American and outright fascist. So I have a simple suggestion. If you don't want to be called a fascist regime or secret police, then stop acting like one.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to discuss possible military operations against Iran when he meets with U.S. President Donald Trump in Washington this week. Israeli officials say the talks come as Israel prepares contingency plans in case negotiations between the U.S. and Iran fall apart. According to 2 Israeli sources, Israel remains skeptical that the early stage talks will succeed and is pushing to ensure its security interests are protected, including maintaining its freedom to act military under any potential deal. Our contributor, David Clement, sat down with former Israeli government spokesperson Eylon Levy for more on this meeting.
What is at stake here in regards to this meeting between Trump and Netanyahu, specifically in regards to Iran?
What is at stake in this meeting between Netanyahu and Trump is nothing less than the future of the Middle East. The question is whether the Iranian regime is going to be given a second chance to rebuild its nuclear weapons program, rebuild its ballistic missile arsenal, rebuild its proxy forces around the Middle East, or whether the United States will use the Iranian regime's moment of ultimate weakness in order to neutralize the threat of Iranian aggression in the Middle East. President Trump will, in the end, make whatever decision he thinks is right for the United States, but I'm sure Netanyahu will be sharing intelligence with the United States, Israel being the eyes and ears of the West here in the Middle East, to make sure that he has all the best information should he choose to take action to neutralize that threat of Iranian aggression, rather than giving them a chance to rebuild now that they're on their knees.
I want to ask you about neutralizing the threat of Iranian aggression, because there are obviously a variety of different options in terms of what that looks like. Is that a military option? Is that a sanctions option? Is it potentially trying to strike a deal with the regime to give up its long-standing efforts to produce these missiles, drones, potentially nuclear weapons?
In an ideal world, the Iranian regime, which cries death to America and death to Israel, would agree to give up the weapons with which it's trying to bring death to America and death to Israel. I hope the Iranian regime will look at President Trump's gunboat diplomacy and see it has so much more to lose by continuing to bang its head against the wall and continue with its ballistic missiles and nuclear program and proxies, and give them up and strike a deal. I'm not optimistic the Iranian regime will do that, but that's the importance of President Trump's gunboat diplomacy. By moving an aircraft carrier group to the Middle East, he is giving the Iranian regime a reason to accept a deal that it really does not want to accept. And as someone who spent 12 days over the summer running into the bomb shelter every other hour because the Iranian regime was pouring ballistic missiles on Tel Aviv, obviously the Israeli people hope that the Iranian regime will agree to neutralize the threat of its own aggression peacefully. But we live in the real world and know the Iranian regime really is ideologically committed to holding on to those weapons programs.
Yeah, and I mean, that begs the question, I guess, from the Israeli perspective, is if there is some sort of hypothetical deal where the regime commits to disembark from all of those endeavors, from the Israeli perspective, could that be believed, right? Are they a credible partner in any type of negotiation, given their longstanding support of terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, and essentially all of the enemies that surround Israel?
The Iranian regime is a duplicitous regime, and no deal can rely on their word. Any deal would have to be based on distrust and verify. But I think we're a long way off from seeing the Iranian regime agreeing to divest itself of the ballistic missiles that threaten Israel, the United Arab Emirates, American forces all across the region, and giving up on the proxy forces that they've poured so much money into at the expense of the Iranian people. And we've seen those brave protesters on the streets of Iran chanting, not for Lebanon, not for Gaza, my life is for Iran. They do not want to see the regime pouring its money into those proxy forces around the Middle East. So any potential deal is going to have to be based on very strict verification. But I think the chances of the Iranian regime, the leopard changing its spots, essentially, are unfortunately very slim. And that means that the risk of military escalation is all too real.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned the proxies there. I want to somewhat pivot. What is the status of those proxies now that the regime has been weakened to such an extent? Are we still seeing the flow of money or weapons to those groups that have been so focused on basically throwing whatever they can at the state of Israel?
Iran's proxy armies in the region are down, but not out, and they're climbing up. In Lebanon, Hezbollah is not disarming, it is rearming. The Lebanese government says that it has cleared Hezbollah out of southern Lebanon. It's complete nonsense. There is no willingness within Lebanon to risk a military confrontation with Hezbollah's terrorist army. And Hezbollah is managing to smuggle weapons via the sea through the land routes in Syria, and it's rebuilding its forces. And that's why Israel is attacking Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon on a practically daily basis. The same is true in Gaza. The ceasefire left Gaza divided between an IDF-controlled territory and Hamas-controlled territory. And the whole population of the Gaza Strip is still under the Hamas terrorist regime. Hamas is taxing the vast amount of humanitarian aid that is going in order to rebuild its terrorist army, in order to hire child soldiers, in order to rebuild those tunnels and to prepare for the next military confrontation. And for Israel, the priority now is making sure that Iran's terrorist forces can never surprise us and drag us into another war ever again. The international community has to insist on the complete demilitarization of Hamas and Hezbollah instead of giving them a reprieve and a chance to rebuild the terrorist armies with which they attacked on October 7th and which they would attack Israeli families again if given half a chance. That threat has to be neutralized.
And back in Canada, a new oral at-home HIV test that delivers results as quickly as 20 minutes will be coming to the country soon. Officials say it will be easy and quick to use and is welcome news for those who like to avoid needles.
It's a small device that tests the oral liquid within the mouth, right? And so it's made economically so you can hold it. So it has a grip at the top of it, and at the bottom it has a flat surface that swabs the top part of your gums and the bottom part of your gums. So it doesn't deposit anything, it's not painful, you just gently do it. So that's what it is really. The folks that we are focused on is mainly folks that are within the demographic that we serve, which is African, Caribbean, Black, South Asian, and Latino. So they were very excited because most of the time, a lot of people are very squeamish about the needle, like getting pricked. They're scared of the pain, they're just scared of the needles, right? And so having something that is just swabbing the top and bottom part of their gums was something that they were really excited about.
A disjointed Canadian women's hockey team suffered its most lopsided Olympic loss ever to the United States on Tuesday, falling 5-0. Canada was without captain Marie-Philippe Poulin, who missed the game with a lower body injury sustained in Monday's 5-1 win over the Czech Republic. Despite the loss, Canada will still advance. All 5 teams in Group A, along with the top 3 in Group B, move on to the quarterfinals this weekend. Canada takes on Germany on Saturday. The Canadians will finish second in the group regardless of Thursday's result against Finland. That preliminary round game, originally scheduled for February 5th, was postponed due to multiple cases of norovirus among the Finnish team. The modern Olympic Games has been held every 4 years since 1896, with 30 summer games and 24 winter games staged through early 2026. But a growing number of sports economists are now questioning whether the event, as it's currently structured, is financially sustainable. Experts argue the Olympics should be dramatically reworked or even scrapped altogether, saying host cities are often left with massive debt, underused white elephant venues, and long-term economic strain. I sat down with economist Dr. Moshe Lander for his perspective.
Now, when people talk about the Olympics, there's often a lot of focus on the cost of hosting the games and potential revenue. Is hosting the Olympics a profitable endeavor?
No. There's very few places that can actually make money hosting the Olympics. Now, the one that is on the record having turned a profit legitimately is Los Angeles back in 1984. And the reason they were profitable were 2 reasons. One, a lot of the infrastructure that was used for the Olympics was privately built, right? So they used where the Lakers played basketball, and they were able to use the Los Angeles Coliseum for a lot of the events, and that already existed. But the other reason was that it was the first Olympics that really just marketed the crap out of everything, right? If they could have put a McDonald's sign on Mary Lou Retton's forehead, they would have. But since then, the costs have risen, and the ability to generate revenues has been somewhat constrained in a way that it's just not possible to do so.
Now, you've mentioned the idea of potentially breaking up the Olympics. How exactly would that work? And in your mind, what does that look like?
Yeah, so to me, the Olympics just don't work anymore. We're seeing it in Italy, where effectively you had to have multiple locations agree to take on various components of the sport. Once you go down this path, then why do you have to have all of the Olympics at the same time? The IOC has said, for example, that they want to move the Olympics back to January instead of February, in part so that the Paralympics and the Olympics can both participate where there's actual winter weather. Climate change is making it more and more difficult to do in February and March. So if we move this back to January, then why do we have to have all of the Olympic events in January? You can have it whenever you want. Maybe some events are more conducive to other times of the year. Now, winter is winter, but for example, where we're watching the NHL players participate in the Olympics, they had to shut down the NHL for 3 weeks. Maybe they'd prefer to have their Olympic event every 4 years, but maybe in October or maybe in June, or maybe they'd prefer to design their season in a way where they don't have to shut down for 3 weeks. The women are going to have the same thing with the PWHL shutting down. We could argue that basketball might be a winter sport because the NBA plays in the winter. So maybe they would want to participate. What you can do at that point then is effectively auction off Olympic events every 4 years to whoever the highest bidder is. And then what you do is you get all of the regalia that comes with it. You get the rings, you get the opening ceremony, the closing ceremony, the torch relay. But now you can have each event in a city or in a country that values that sport the highest. It doesn't make sense to have hockey in Italy. They just don't care about it the way we do in North America, or the way the Scandinavians do, or the way that the Czechs or the Slovaks do. So why don't we have the Olympics for hockey in places that actually care about it? Speed skating is really important in Korea, in Japan, in the Netherlands. Let them bid then on hosting the speed skating events. But the other advantage is that by breaking it up into different times of the year, into different parts of the world, the IOC can maximize its benefits, and the host city or cities can minimize their costs. If you had the Olympics in North America, you don't need to build infrastructure. There's already 32 NHL appropriate arenas ready to roll. And so it would look more like the World Cup, where you could have multiple events in multiple cities, and the cost would be much closer to zero. And so the ability to turn a profit would be greater, and the interest of cities looking to host it would be greater. And so rather than the IOC coming to Canada saying, it'd be great if you put in a bid sometime before 2050 and begging places to host the Olympics, it would be the other way around, like it used to be back in the 20th century.
But with that approach, does that not kind of undermine the spirit of the games and bringing all of the world's best athletes together in one place where all of the world can tune in for 2 weeks and watch sports that they don't usually watch?
Yeah, there's nothing better in the Summer Olympics than when you see an American gymnast standing alongside an American basketball player, and you take a look that one's almost double the size of the other, right? There's this unique get together. And in fact, back in the day when Juan Antonio Samaranch was the head of the IOC, I'm of an age where I can distinctly recall him saying, I call upon the youth to gather in 4 years in the city of whatever for the next Olympiad. That was like the big announcement. And that is the history of what the Olympics is for. But I think sometimes institutions need to evolve with the times. And yes, it would be a shame then that we don't have those experiences anymore. But right now you find that cities just do not want to host the Olympics. And so if the issue is evolve or die, or evolve and descend into irrelevance, that might be what's facing the IOC in its tough decisions. I would point out that even though the Olympics are going on in Italy right now, and we're all going to get caught up in it for the next 2.5 weeks, myself included, remember that in part the time zones are brutal. So all of that Olympic men's hockey that all of us in Canada are waiting to watch is going to be taking place in the morning or in the afternoon. And by the time we watch it in the evening, it's on pre-record and we already know the outcome because it's all over our social media. That's going to make it really difficult to maximize the revenue that you can generate from people that want to advertise for it. The IOC might say, yeah, this doesn't make sense then that we're broadcasting in parts of the world that, fine, it brings the athletes together and it gives them a great experience. But in order to continue to give great experiences for the world's viewers, which is now where you make your money, you need to maybe be a little more flexible in how you do things. And maybe it's just grouping together sub-classifications of events together, but breaking apart others.
Well, you mentioned potentially breaking up the games, but is that the reason that there are no economic profits for the games? Like, how much of the unprofitability is the fault of the IOC and the process for picking host cities and the requirements that they're setting?
So as the Olympics have become more and more unprofitable, less and less cities want to bid on the games. It's very difficult to go back to taxpayers and say, oops, we ran over budget. Back in the 1970s, Montreal ran so far over budget that the Olympic Stadium, which still stands as a testament to financial mismanagement, is lovingly known as the Big O, OWE, or O for Olympic, take your pick. That type of thing could have been done in the 1970s, in the 1980s, where maybe taxpayers weren't as unified in their resentment towards having to pay taxes. Now, with social media and with different lobbying groups, it's much more difficult to go to municipalities or countries or state, province, and say, sorry, folks, we're going to lose here a huge amount of money, and taxpayers are going to be on the hook for it. I think because of that, we've seen that less and less cities or countries want to host this event. And the ones that are hosting it are now either ones that are non-democratic, where you don't have to face taxpayers, or maybe autocratic, where it's more a testament to vanity than it is to good fundamental economic logic, right? How else can you explain why Beijing would be a Winter Olympics host when the average temperature in Beijing is above zero? How else to explain why Russia would host the Winter Olympics, even though Russia could easily be argued as a winter country? They held it in a seaside resort of Sochi. That makes no sense. We could even make the argument that Vancouver is not exactly the most ideal place in Canada for winter sport. And yes, Whistler is part of the story in Vancouver, but it really didn't make a lot of sense other than just when you're desperate for bidders and somebody comes in, this is the way that the IOC now has to award it, rather than back in the 20th century where you would have cities and countries falling all over each other. Part of it, too, is the idea of raising awareness of the city. That might have worked in Calgary in 1988, where many people in the world would not have heard of Calgary. It's now impossible on social media to think that somebody couldn't find out about Calgary in a much cheaper way than having to host a multi-billion-dollar event that's going to cost taxpayers.
Well, Dr. Lander, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Anytime.
A day after a surprising live television confession that he had cheated on his girlfriend, a Norwegian biathlete said today that he regrets making his private life public at the Milan Cortina Winter Olympics. He made the revelation during an interview with Norwegian network NRK after winning bronze in the men's 20-kilometer individual race on Tuesday. He tearfully admitted to being unfaithful to the love of his life, apparently in an attempt to win her back.
You talked in the mixed show about meeting your love of your life and cheating on her, but how do you feel about it right now? Do you think it was the right choice or?
Really, I don't know if it's the right choice or not. But it was the choice I made. We make different choices during our life, and that's how you make life, basically. So today I made the choice to tell the world what I did. So maybe there's a chance that she will see what she really means to me, and maybe not. But I don't want to think I didn't try everything to get her back. So again, Johan, I don't want to steal the show today. I hope this is just like a day or two long thing, and then your Olympic gold medal is forever.
I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Good night, Canada.